Hello, good evening and welcome. I'm Karima Brown and you're watching Political Exchange, where we unpack Africa's political economy. Kenya, East Africa's largest economy, goes to the polls in March 2013, and there are fears that unless managed properly, the process could lead to uncertainty and affect the overall stability in the long-term prospects of that country. Joining me to talk about these issues is Nicole Beardsworth. She's a researcher at the South African Institute of International Relations. We are also joined from Nairobi, Kenya, by Aly-Khan, CEO of Rich Management. And later on in the program, we also talk to Dr. Jim McPhee from Strathmore Business School. Mr. Sachu, let's start with you. You are in Kenya. Are you thinking that the concerns regarding the upcoming election next year is overrated? Are we being alarmist here?
I think, the first thing is to put this situation into context. We've mishandled 3 out of the last 4 elections. So we got a 25% pass rate. In 92 and 97, the troubles happened before the election. In 2007, the troubles began immediately after. And the correlation between GDP growth and the electoral cycle is nearly at a 1 coefficient. Essentially, each of those fumbles, the economy completely slowed down to a standstill, stayed there for quite a while before being able to pick up. So historically, we've been trapped in these 5-year cycles. We've had a good growth spurt typically happening just before the election happens, and then things have fallen apart. So I think if you look at Kenya from the outside, you've got to be cognizant of these facts. Now, the situation as I find it, I think there have been a couple of key interventions which have inflected political risk. In particular, I think the ICC has had a very big influence in changing behavior and making and probably assisting in reducing our political risk. I know many of our politicians are keen on blaming the ICC for interfering in our sovereignty, but as an economist, I think they've given us some reason for hope. They've brought a process to a problem which was intractable, and I think the majority of Kenyans feel that they are reducing the political risk.
Now,
answering your question, sorry.
Now, what I wanted to ask you is exactly the point that you're talking about, the politicians feeling that the ICC is perhaps fueling the situation, but your view that the majority of Kenyans are in fact welcoming the move.
Absolutely. If you look at the poll numbers, it's always been around 2/3 who've been in favor of the ICC. Those against the ICC are in a minority position, but they are very vociferous and extremely powerful because the ICC, after all, has ensnared those who are extremely powerful and were basically able to escape the consequences of their behavior. So it's a popular move by any account. And I think, the ICC is forced to change in behavior. You really have to be naive if you don't believe the ICC has algorithms, are able to monitor, timeline various numbers of people. And I think that's made a massive difference in terms of how our politicians are behaving now. Then, on top of that, we've had the promulgation of the new constitution, which is proving a very empowering tool, in particular for the likes of the judiciary, which has a new head, Chief Justice, Mr. William Mutunga, who's really turning out to be quite a game changer in that he's interpreting that constitution to the letter, and he's not being swayed either way. So when I look at that, I look at the ICC intervention, I see the stock markets behaving, it's been rallying all year. I think international investors have overblown Kenya risk, and I think Kenya political risk is cooling, and the election might well be the tipping point for quite a big rally off the back of improved political risk.
Okay, Nicole, let me bring you in here. Mr. Sachu saying that there is a very definite link between elections and negative growth in Kenya. What are your forecasts? Are you believing that the Kenyans are managing the situation, or do you believe that the upcoming election does hold the potential for violence, along the lines that we've seen post-elections in 2008?
Well, my sense really is that there are a lot more problems with the Kenyan situation than many would like us to believe. In terms of electoral reforms, many of those have not been carried through sufficiently. And in instituting the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission, that has not really led to widespread reconciliation, particularly at a grassroots level. And as we saw in 2007, as well as in 1992 and 1997, the violence was perpetrated at a grassroots level. There are still a number of militia organizations that are relatively active in the country, and that could be mobilized ahead of the elections. So my concern really revolves around Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto and how they position themselves ahead of the elections, particularly with regards to the ICC.
Mr. Sachu, these are two men that are both candidates in the election. What is the view of Kenyan business regarding the fact that these men are even standing and the fact that they could very well be indicted? What does that do for confidence in the Kenyan economy?
The absolute black swan risk is that one of these two candidates is elected president, and then we have a situation where the first international official visit is to somewhere like The Hague. So clearly it is, for me, the worst possible outcome is that a potential NDIT at the ICC can be elected. It then brings a Bashir haircut to Kenyan assets, and it would be, frankly, a diabolical outcome. However, I think it's entirely unlikely, because what they're doing is in order for them to have a seat at the table, they've got to bring a big block of votes. The way to consolidate their block of votes is by painting the ICC as a horrible interfering foreigner, coming to pick on us, and that's what they've been doing, and it's been a successful political strategy at their base, but it is not going to be sufficient to carry them to the presidency. So I discount that option, but it is really the worst outcome from a political perspective and an economic perspective.
If one takes Kenya's economic position at the moment, obviously because you're so export dependent, the euro crisis has affected Kenya particularly badly. If one takes the latest report from the World Bank, which basically says that the coming elections and the Eurozone crisis are the two big risk factors, what is the kind of forecast going forward? What is it that business can do to mitigate some of that risk?
So you're quite correct. We're highly correlated to Europe in a way that many African economies are not. Essentially, we export a lot of fresh vegetables, fresh flowers into the European markets. We're already seeing European weakness feed into results. TPS Serena had very poor first half because of European weakness. Cargo tonnage being lifted out of Kenya into Europe is down dramatically. Prices paid are down as well. So I accept that, and I think the business community sees the international environment as problematic. I think we haven't felt the full blow to the solar plexus yet. I think in terms of the elections, we've been here before. The Kenyans are pretty resilient. I think the general consensus is that the government, as it is too expensive, that the future government might not achieve everything that the business community might want, but essentially that the trajectory has changed. And I think, for those people who are on the sidelines, who are waiting for the election to happen, you're going to miss a big rally here. The rally's already underway. I think it's got a lot longer to go. And really, I don't think there's a choice now. If this is a market you're seeking to enter, you've really got to look through the noise and enter now. Because if you don't, you're in danger of missing what could become quite a runaway train.
The problems of Kenya's economy is, of course, also structural. What do we see in terms of the policy environment going forward, Mr. Sachu, that some of these new candidates might bring that will, address those structural problems of the Kenyan economy and look at a more long-term solution and make Kenya less dependent on exports?
So I think that's a very interesting question, and your question is whether there is a clear, defined policy and roadmap in place. I think under President Kibaki, There's been a definite thrust in the direction of building our infrastructure. Anyone who comes to Nairobi will see that our roads are being built. We are coming from a low base, but there's been clear and visible signs of progress, and it's very helpful because we remain the hub within the region. When you look at the political debate, and we have so many candidates for president right now, everybody seems to think that they have to say that they're going for the presidency. There are very few politicians with an agenda and a program. We haven't reached that maturity. We tend to still argue about what I would consider non-core issues. There was a Gallup poll yesterday which said the main concern of people is jobs. 36% of Kenyans are concerned about jobs. But who out of our politicians has a robust job creation plan? I'd be hard-pressed to tell you. So we still have this disconnect, I think, between the political class and the business community. I think there's been some convergence, but it's not optimal yet. So I would have to say, I want to see a lot more. From a policy point of view, I think they've got to make sure that the port facilities are sufficient to support the region. The region is the second fastest growing region in the world after ASEAN. There's a lot of potential. I think it's going to be very key to create a good policy framework around the oil and gas sector, which is frankly red hot and at a tipping point. So I think there are lots of challenges. I'm not sure we're on top of them, but there's a growing sense and momentum behind civil society, behind the population, to make these sort of demands at the level of their policymakers. The policymakers need to step up and interact and create a clear framework and roadmap.
Mr. Sacho, a final question to you before you leave us. Young people make up a substantial section of the Kenyan population. Are they being accommodated in terms of their agenda, particularly around job creation and skills?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and it surely applies to the whole of sub-Saharan Africa. In Kenya, more than 65% of the population are below the age of 30. In terms of voting patterns, it's a really disjunctive moment, because if you can win the 18 to 28 age group in Kenya, you essentially win with a landslide. The question is about mobilizing those people. Are there issues being dealt with? I think increasingly they've found a voice. You just have to look at things like social media usage, which has become a very activist tool. It's explosive. I think we're second only to yourselves in Africa in terms of our usage. So young people have found their voice. They've applied themselves to these new digital platforms. Politicians are increasingly understanding they've got to deal with these questions that are coming at them. But there's a gulf between those politicians who've embraced the 21st century. Someone like Martha Karua, who was a minister previously, set up her own party, has been really ahead of the curve. Peter Kenneth. But I think out of the big politicians, they're just dipping their toe in the water in this engagement between young people and their political leaders.
We have to take a short break. When we come back, we will speak more with our guest in Johannesburg. For now, we say goodbye to our guest in Nairobi, Aly-Khan Sachu, the CEO of Rich Management.